When Elite Dangerous Odyssey landed, it most certainly did with a bounce. It was plagued by performance issues and bugs, but for VR players, the absence of the on-foot combat within the game, within VR, was a real niggle. But the thing that really got under our skin was the noticeable performance degradation from Horizons to Odyssey. Players who had stable frame rates within Horizons were not enjoying the same in Odyssey. We're now on update 9, so it's time to take a look again at the VR performance of Elite Dangerous Odyssey. Can you maintain a steady 90 frames per second? Our test system has a Ryzen 5800X and an RTX 3080 Ti. Okay folks, here we are in Elite Dangerous Odyssey. As I say, this is running on a 5800X AMD Ryzen CPU with a 3080 Ti. A quick look at our settings before we dive into the game. And we have got this set at 100% resolution scale for the Valve Index. That resolution will be up on the screen now. Quick overview of the settings. So we've got the texture quality at high, texture filter quality at times 16, both the shadow settings at medium. We've got bloom and blur off. Neither of those look particularly good in VR and have a performance impact. Anti-aliasing all the way up at the highest setting of SMAA. Super sampling set to quality. Now this setting here really is the most important. This is the upscaling setting. That's the AMD FSR 1.0. That's an upscaling technology that allows the game to be rendered at a higher resolution and then uses some clever algorithms to upscale that. Now what that does is create better visual quality whilst delivering pretty good frame rates. We've got ambient occlusion at medium, environment quality at ultra, FX quality medium, depth of field at medium, material quality at medium, HMD image quality. We're very fortunate that on the 3080 Ti we can crank that all the way up to times 1.5, so that's increasing the render resolution within the headset, again increasing visual quality. Galaxy map quality at medium, terrain quality ultra, level of detail blending for terrain also at ultra, and then a couple of other settings that only matter under particular circumstances. So by no means are all of these settings low. These are pretty high settings for VR. But as I say, that upscaling setting here, this AMD FSR 1.0, that really is the most important setting. Switching that back to normal has a very, very adverse impact to the performance of the game. So enough about settings, let's wade on into the game and have a look at how it performs. So here we are in a space station. This is frankly the most demanding area of the game. You always get a frame rate drop here. Trying to maintain constant 90 frames per second I think really would degrade the visual quality elsewhere in the game. We're holding a fairly respectable 85 to 90 frames per second, so we've got a little bit of reprojection going on, but not a lot. I mean, from a subjective point of view, it looks perfectly smooth. Anti-aliasing really does continue to be Elite Dangerous Achilles' heel. The jaggies really aren't that great. You can crank the resolution up in order to compensate for that, but it really is going to have an adverse impact on your performance of the game. If I just do a quick spin round in the station here, I mean, you can see we're holding a sort of dip down there to 72 frames per second, but you know, we're upwards of 80 frames per second the majority of the time, and this really is the most demanding area of the game. Slight dip down to 60 frames per second there as we spin around, but you'll see as we come out of the station, you're going to see a very, very, very sharp performance improvement in indeed. There we go, straight up to 90 frames per second, as it's no longer rendering the internal environment within that station actually, and we can fly around the station pretty comfortably. This is the odd dip, but it's above, I think, 90 frames per second more than it isn't, and it looks visibly very, very, very smooth to me. If I ignore the frame counter for 1 second, which of course you wouldn't have open normally whilst you're playing, slight bit of stuttering there, but this is a marked improvement on where it was when the game first released. As we're moving away from the entranceway of the station, we have very, very consistent 90 frames per second now, which is really, really good to see. And I can live with the, you know, in the odd demanding area of the game, I can live with the odd bit of stuttering from time to time. It is unoptimized, certainly, as a game, but actually quite a demanding game within its own right as well, particularly when you're playing this in VR. And I still hold the very, very strong opinion that playing this in VR is substantially more fun than playing it on a flat screen monitor. So I think that's enough with the stations. Let's get ourselves into a resource site, get ourselves into some combat, and see how it performs there. So here we are in Super Cruise, maintaining a relatively steady 90 frames per second. The odd dip below that, but nothing too dramatic. It feels, subjectively ignoring the frame counter, very, very, very smooth here. We're coming up on a resource extraction site. Now that will be rendering a bunch of asteroids and ships, so would be more demanding than you would expect to see here in Super Cruise. But yeah, I mean, this looks great. It feels very nice and smooth. Very, very, very enjoyable experience indeed. We'll be here on the lit side of the asteroid belt as well, which I think will better demonstrate the sort of performance you can reasonably expect. But we're going to drop out Super Cruise in a second, get ourselves into some combat, and take a look at how that performance contrasts against Super Cruise. There's that sense of scale of that planet that you definitely really, really appreciate within VR that you're just not going to get on a flat screen monitor. It's a bit of a dip there as we come out of Super Cruise, just as it's rendering the new scene, but again, we're pretty consistently into 90 frames per second. He's wanted. Get ourselves into some combat and see how it performs. We're maintaining a pretty good frame rate at the moment.
Scan detected.
Let him get the scan in. We're not carrying any cargo, so he'll soon lose interest. Again, dipping down a little bit, but it's not terrible. Not terrible. He's not going to last too long, I don't think. But yeah, we're sort of wobbling anywhere from sort of 80 frames per second to 90 frames per second. Obviously, it's just the one ship here that we're in combat with. His shields are nearly down.
Flight assist off. Flight assist on.
going to last much longer. There's the odd dip into the 70s, but you know, from a subjective point of view, it's an enjoyable experience. Couple more ships coming in. Let's see what that does from a frame rate perspective, but yeah, maintaining a comfortable 90 frames per second. Rammed into me.
Target destroyed.
Okay, I mean, that was a pretty good experience. Let's see if we can get into a slightly bigger combat situation with multiple ships and see what that does from a performance perspective. Speak of the devil. Looks like we've got one over here. Dipping down sort of into the 80s. Who were they attacking? So that third lance. Yeah, it is. Oh, not in an optimal position. Let's reverse.
Target shields offline.
Dipping into the late 70s, but again, it's still perfectly reasonable experience. The reprojection in Steam VR doing a good job of keeping it perceivably smooth. Yeah, a little bit more demanding with a few ships involved in the combat, but it still looks great. Those twists and turns not making me feel nauseous in the slightest. And that's really the adverse impact that you get when the frame rate's dropping very, very low. Is just makes you feel nauseous. Oh, rammed us. I don't think that worked out too well for him though.
Scan detected.
No, that's performing very well. Very happy with that. So let's get ourselves down onto a planet and see what the performance round a settlement looks like. A quick jump into witch space to have a look at the performance there.
3, 2, 1, engage.
So a brief dip down. Again, that's pretty good performance. We're wobbling between 85 and 90 frames per second, but yeah, it's perceivably very, very, very comfortable. Very happy with that. Alright, we're going to get ourselves off to Black Hide. One of the engineers of the Dweller resides there. We'll have a dip down onto that. It's not far from the star. We're in the process of building out an anti-Xeno crate Mark II. We've been visiting engineers quite a bit recently. We'll do a full descent down onto this planet and have a look at what the performance looks like. And it looks like the planet rotation means that we'll be coming in with that on the light side, potentially. I do personally find there's very little performance difference between whether you land at these settlements and they're lit from the sun or whether you have to use night vision. But yeah, we've got very consistently high frame rates as we come in down on the planet. That level of detail blending setting that we were talking about earlier, that's to do with how well it transitions between the different level of detail as you get closer to the planet. And we've got that set on Ultra, and it does a pretty good job at that setting, frankly. Might be able to observe a little bit of flashing going on. I'm going to talk some more about that towards the end of the video. That's an acknowledged bug by Frontier, which is probably my single biggest gripe with VR performance at the moment. We will come back to that, with focusing more on frame rates just for now. Again, this looks great, visibly smooth. All of the improved lighting that you get with the Odyssey. That really does look great. A big noticeable dip down there as we came out of Super Cruise into our glide. It's maintaining it pretty well above the 80s, the odd dip down into the 70s. Again, perceivably and subjectively, performing pretty well.
Falcon, Delacy, Uniform, Romeo, Bravo. Automated flight control protocol initiated. Please submit a request prior to landing. Docking permission authorized. You may proceed to landing pad 07.
So slightly less consistently at 90 frames per second, but still it's around about the 80 frames per second mark, so there's definitely some reprojection going on. You can see that marked on the yellow on the grass, but there's more green on there, and perceivably for me, again, a bit like the space stations, this is a very demanding area. Dropping down more as we're getting closer to the landing pad. But it is a demanding area like the space stations, and I think it's worth the compromise. You'd have to have the settings so low that the rest of the game would look terrible. But that, perceivably, was very smooth.
Docking procedure completed. Ship secured. Greetings, Commander.
A bit of stuttering, but it's very playable. It's an enjoyable experience, and I think that's the most important thing. So, the final test, of course, is the infamous 2D display that you get when you disembark. Let's take a look and see how that performs. This is really still very disappointing to me that we're not able to do this in VR. It really does detach the experience from being in the ship to being on foot. Anti-aliasing continuing to not be great here, but a very, very consistent 90 frames per second that we're managing to pull off.
Black Hide is always open to trade.
And there's the man himself. Yeah, we're getting a pretty reasonable 90 frames per second there. Chuck in a bit of combat, I'm sure that would change. But overall, they are starting to get there. But we do need to talk about that graphical glitching. And we'll just return to our ship and then we'll have a natter about that. So the VR performance has substantially improved, there is no doubt of that, and more importantly, it's actually fun to play this game again. But my one major niggle is related to the flashing I referred to earlier on in the video. This typically happens when you're next to large celestial objects such as stars, but it can also happen next to space stations and planets, and what appears to happen is there is a flash, a single frame or a couple of frames flash that appears within VR. It doesn't happen all of the time, but it is very annoying and distracting and immersion breaking when it does happen. I recorded this happening so that I could take a frame by frame look at what was actually taking place, and what appears to happen is it renders a single frame from a different perspective, so from within the ship or outside the ship, and it happens so quickly it appears as a flash in VR, but it's actually rendering a frame from a different perspective. There is an open support ticket with Frontier Developments and they have acknowledged the issue, but these tickets have to be voted on by the community in order for them to be prioritized by the development team. So I've dropped a link to the ticket down in the description below. Please do go and take the time to go and vote on this issue so that it's prioritized for resolution and we take one more solid step to a really great experience for VR players within Odyssey. As always, I hope you're very well wherever in the world you are. Stay safe in the skies and I will see you in my next one.